Hi, I'm Barbara Josselson, and I am so glad to be back today to talk some more about journaling, making this moment in history count. Um, a guide to journaling during this difficult time in our lives, in the quarantine, and all the experiences and emotions that it's calling up that's going to impact us. And the stories that we're creating now in real time that are going to have a huge impact on future generations. So let's see, before I begin, I just want to raise the computer a little bit so that I'm not so low. There, that's much better. Be a little bit more. So sorry for not having this already done. So, okay, so what I wanted to do, I have a really wonderful autobiography that I'm going to share a couple of portions with you. But before I even do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are. This is week 5 of the journaling class that we started. And we've talked about a lot of different things. I believe, actually, the good news is we're going to be continuing this class again into through June. And I'm excited about that. I think it's been really interesting talking with you and getting some feedback and sort of working on crafting these really important real life documents that are going to just be more and more important as life goes on. So let's see. So I just want to talk a little bit about how you would organize this. What I'm finding is that uh, we've done a lot of different snippets um, in writing that have been organized around themes, as you know, and that I've given you based on some memoirs that I've been reading. And let's see, the we started by talking about what emotions that you're feeling. That was the very first one. We went on to talk about, I asked you to imagine what the day would be like when all this is over, whatever that meant to you. We talked about, just looking at my notes, we did some prompts about family and did some prompts about things you saw outside. We did some prompts about love. And if you want to start to put all these bits together, the first thing that I would suggest is that you make a decision as to whether you want to set up your journal chronologically or thematically. And if you want to set it up chronologically, you would start maybe with the first post about what it was like to be in this situation and what you were feeling. And you'd move on um, to the events as they unfolded, whether the next point was your reflection on love or on family or taking a walk, what you saw outside. And ultimately, it seems to me that the very last post would be, or your very last entry in this journal would be about what this is going to look like when it's all over, what your first day when this is all over is going to look like. But you can also organize these pieces thematically. You can start with you can have a heading that's called emotions, a page or a heading that's called love, a heading that's called family, a heading that's called hopes and dreams, and work your way through putting the different posts, or I keep calling them posts, putting the different journal entries into each of the thematic chapters. And you can even then begin to decorate the journal with stickers or illustrations, photographs that you download from your own photo files, or to make it an entire book. So that was my recommendation. But now what I'd like to do is move on to the memoir, to the autobiography I want to look at today, the memoir. And this is one of my favorite people in the whole world. It's on my Kindle, so I'm going to have to hold it up to you. But this is Julie Andrews' autobiography. It's actually her second memoir. It's called, and I think very interestingly, it's called Homework. It's about mostly her time in Hollywood, but I think her earlier book, her first book, was about more of her younger years. And this one really focuses on her Hollywood years. But the interesting thing is that she called it homework. And home and ideas of home and themes of home play a huge part in her writing. So I wanted to read a couple of portions from the very beginning, not so much the Hollywood years, but more when she does a summary of what her youth was like. And I think it's really interesting because she didn't have a particularly easy childhood. She had evidently a kind of difficult time growing up. But what was clear is that a lot of her formative experiences, even growing up under the shadow of World War II, would eventually have a big impact on the rest of her life. So the first thing I'm going to read for you from this memoir, and this memoir is pretty recent, came out 2019, so it's really recent. Let's see. She starts off with actually, what I think is very sweet is that she dedicates this to her grandchildren with love. So, as we're doing here, putting together documentation and journals for the future generations, she clearly was doing as well. And here's a small poem that she says she wrote in 1978, which I thought was very touching. And so I'm going to read it to you. It says, I know that I am all that I am, and all that I am is full and ripe. All that I am is standing still, waiting and watching and bursting with life. Holding the straining seams of my skin, my passion and wit and my sanity in, waiting for someone to soothe and to say, I understand, you're home. So, of course, it's just so revealing how the idea of home and the title of the book, Homework, how how much of this memoir is going to be about searching for people, for places, for emotional connections and emotional spots in her heart that make her feel at home. I wanted to read a little bit about her very early days. Let's see. And this was right at the beginning. I was born in Walton on Thames, a small suburban village in the county of Surrey, just 18 miles southwest of London. My mother's father was a coal miner and her mother was a chambermaid. My mother, Barbara Morris, was just 18 when her parents died within a year of each other. Her aspirations to become a classical pianist were cut short by the fact that she was now the primary caregiver to her 13-year-old sister, Joan. It wasn't long before the girls met my father, Ted Wells, an impoverished teacher. He fell madly in love with my red-haired, vivacious mother and offered stability for both sisters, despite his economic status. When my parents married, they moved with my aunt to a small cottage, which they called Threesome. My mother gave piano lessons and my aunt taught dance to augment my father's wages. My father was the family's rock. My brother John was born 2 years after me, and Dad showed us the wonders of nature, trees, seasons, wildlife. Dad adored rivers and lakes and often took us rowing on the Thames. He wasn't physically demonstrative, but there was never any doubt as to his love for and dedication to us. Now, it'll go on to talk about how her mother ultimately left her father and remarried. Um, and she remarried a man named Ted Andrews, which was how Julie Andrews got her last name. And then that began her performing career. But I thought it's so interesting when people look back on their parents and their grandparents. Because I think it's really important. I don't think when people are writing autobiographies or memoirs, they do that just because they may as well start at the beginning. I think they really focus because actually all of us have, if we're talking about us all having two parents and four grandparents and eight great grandparents, there's so many people we can look to, but we ultimately look to the background of the people I think who affected us most or who we think affected us most. So she's talking about her mother being vivacious, her father just falling in love with that, what did she say? I think red-haired, vivacious mother of hers, and her mother gave piano lessons, so she was musical, and how so she had two parents, a mother who was vivacious and creative and very much like it sounds like an extrovert, and a father who she called a rock, the family's rock, not particularly demonstrative, but really solid and someone to lean on. And I think that those two aspects of her parents are form the basis, and I'm sure as the memoir goes on, she'll continue to go back to those two different personalities and how they helped shape her and which parts of her parents she relied on. So I wanted you, just for fun, to sort of put yourself in her shoes and pretend that you are writing your autobiography and you're going to start with your parents. And I would ask you to think about what aspects of your parents, what are the overriding characteristics of their personalities helped make you who you are, and maybe more important, helped you deal with the current quarantine, the fear, the perhaps some of the grief, whatever it is that you're feeling. What are the characteristics of your parents, the overriding personality elements that impact you right now in this moment? So I'm going to give you some time. I'm going to go back and put on some music. And what I'll do, I think, is ask you to start maybe on your mother's side. It could be, or on the female side, I guess, if there's a female parent or relative or mentor or somebody who was an overriding influence on your life. So let's start with that. And at some point, in about maybe 45 seconds or a minute from now, maybe a little longer, I will ask you to then talk about the other parent or the other person. Okay, so I'm gonna let's see, I've got some ballet music again today. Well, actually, I don't really want to do the Nutcracker because I kind of feel that, well, you know what, let's just do it. So there we go. Here you have the Nutcracker Suite to inspire you. And I'll check back in a little bit. Okay, I'm going to break in here just shortly to suggest now that you move to either your father or a grandfather, a male parental influence when you were growing up, or just a secondary one if you want to do that, but who had a different personality, brought a different personality element to the table to your growing up. And what about that person inspired you, gave you help or support for what we're going through right now, or maybe didn't give you support, maybe I had a personality that made you more anxious, I don't know, but just somebody else who was influential in your life and probably helped shape your own response to the quarantine now. And again, I'm going to go quiet for a little while, let you think about that and start to write. But just somebody else who was influential in your life and probably helped shape your own response to the quarantine. And again, I'm going to go quiet for a little while. And I'll just let you know that Swan Lake that you're writing to right now. Okay, I'm going to give you about another 30 seconds if you want to take a look at what you have written, maybe make any word changes or any quick revisions you want to do. You can go ahead and do that. And then in about 25 seconds now, we'll continue. Okay, as the music gets a little more dramatic, I'm going to turn it down and continue to read a little bit more from Julie Andrews' recent autobiography, Homework. She talks at this point a little bit later into the piece. She's talking about her mother remarried Ted Andrews, and they changed her name, her last name. She was Julia Wells, and they changed her to Julie Andrews, and she began calling her stepfather Pop, as opposed to, I guess, Dad, who was her original dad. Let's see. And she talks about in the spring of 1943, they moved out of London to a suburban part of Kent. Pop began giving me singing lessons, perhaps in an attempt to bond with his new stepdaughter, perhaps to give me something to do, since my school had shut down briefly due to the escalation of the war. So kind of rings a bell to me about the idea of a national emergency causing, or international emergency causing schools to close. I disliked these lessons intensely, talking about her singing lessons. I was shy and embarrassed, but Mom and Pop were surprised to discover that I had a strong soprano voice, quite unique for my age. Our new home in Kent had an air raid shelter in the garden, and as the war continued, we often spent our nights there. By mid 1944, the Germans were sending doodle bugs to England. These were pilotless flying bombs that came across the English Channel, cut out over their target, and plummeted to Earth. I could tell the difference between the sound of these doodle bugs approaching and our own fighter planes. The air raid sirens became so constant that they prevented families from accomplishing the most basic of tasks, making dinner, doing the laundry. My mother came up with the idea that I should sit on top of the air raid shelter with a pair of opera glasses and a whistle. Whenever I heard a doodlebug approaching, I would blow the whistle, giving my mother and, as it turned out, many other neighborhood homemakers time to finish a chore before running to take shelter. I was on duty in all weathers. One rainy day, I rebelled and stayed in the house. After the bomb dropped, several neighbors came to the door demanding, "Why the hell didn't she blow the whistle?" Isn't that interesting? You think about the fears that we have now and the fear of contagion, the virus, and our concern about bringing the virus into our homes, what we will encounter when we're outside with people, and just the constant fear. And it just strikes me as so, just so startling that this was their fear, was that they were, constantly on the lookout for bombs that would drop and having to run out to the bomb shelter. And, while it's such a different enemy, um, and kind of threat, it's still that constant vigilance that I feel that just, just what she's writing about feels to me like it's so resonant, because we now know what it's like to live with a different kind of threat and a different kind of fear, but really that pervasive fear. So what I wanted to do for our last few minutes together is ask you again to look back and to think of something in your own childhood that was a threat or a fear. Now it might not be as huge as worrying that bombs are going to drop on you, but it could be just some other kind. I'm thinking about children who grow up with a fear of dogs, or even a fear of a mean teacher, but something that was kind of pervasive. um or I know that growing up, there was a time when polio was kind of a constant threat before the polio vaccine, and just the fear of living and never quite knowing, if people feeling they weren't quite safe from that. So I wanted to see if you could think back on a certain fear that the current situation, if it doesn't remind you of that, at least there are some parallels. Well, and you can write about what that fear was like and how it differs from what you're going through today. um, so we're kind of focusing on childhood right today. So why don't you go ahead and start that? I'll put some music on again. We're up to the Sleeping Beauty ballet for music. And so again, going back to a childhood, a strong fear, some strong threat, and what it was like, and maybe how it compares to what you're feeling today. So why don't you go ahead? And what it was like, and maybe how it compares to what you're feeling today. So I'm going to break in here just for a short moment. If you're still working, please go on and continue writing and maybe just listen a little bit for me. But what I wanted to mention was that Julie Andrews continues with her memoir. She talks about that after the war ended, so there was no more threat of bombs. Then she said, I began to travel with Mom and Pop as they toured in vaudeville. I was struck by the contrast between the glamorous appearance of life in the theater and the rather shabby reality of its backstage. Just before my 10th birthday, Mom and Pop invited me to join them on stage during one of their performances. I stood on a beer crate in order to reach the microphone and sang a duet with Pop, while Mom accompanied us on the piano. Little by little, I began to join their act more often. Let's see. She also says this was kind of interesting. I thought that she says, back at school, I struggled to find my place socially, ever aware of my bandy legs, buck teeth, and lazy eye, along with my ineptitude at sports. On Saturday mornings, whenever possible, I escaped into programs for children at the local cinema. It was my first introduction to the magic of Hollywood. Very interesting to think in terms of Julie Andrews feeling so insecure about her appearance. But at any rate, that just shows that eventually the fear was gone in her childhood when the war was over, and that's when she began to sing and perform. And I wonder if you might want to continue with what you're doing and just spend a little bit of time talking about when the fear for you in this childhood fear that you've been writing about, when that subsided and how and what the reason was. So why don't you take another minute or so to complete this prompt, and then we'll wrap up. Doing and just spend a little bit of time talking about when the fear for you in this childhood fear that you've been writing about, when that subsided and how and what the reason was. So why don't you take another minute or so to complete this prompt, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so as we begin to wrap up for today, I'm just going to show you one more time the cover of the autobiography we've been talking about, Julie Andrews, her second one. I actually met Julie Andrews a few years ago. She and her daughter Emma Walton Hamilton, who also was a co-writer of this, have a series of children's books, and I was at a children's writing conference and was able to meet her and get her signature on a copy of her children's book, and she was just lovely, and it was quite a thrill. So anyway, I'm going to start to wrap up here. I will just remind you that I'll be back next week, same time, and that these live streams are also available to replay if there's something you want to hear again. And I would also remind you that, like the other community live streaming instructors, I teach writing at the Sarah Lawrence College Writing Institute. I teach a novel writing class, and if you have any curiosity about that, the summer session is beginning next week, and there'll be a second summer session later in the summer. And so please feel free to reach out to the Sarah Lawrence Writing Institute to get more information on that. And I will just again mention that I have a new novel out. It's called The Lilac House. It was launched in March. It's about small towns and romance and second chances and love and family and parenting and all the things I love to talk about and write about. And I hope you'll check it out. Available through bookstores or online. So have a great week. Nice to spend some time with you again. And I will see you next Thursday. Okay? Bye now. Love and family and parenting and all the things I love to talk about and write about. And I hope